So most of the limpets that you'll be familiar with on the seashore sit out in the open on our big things that hide away like this under a tightly attached shell. So somebody is hiding in there. Hello there, having a little snooze. But those are not the only limpety type things on the seashore. There are quite a few other limpet allies that live quite different types of lives. So limpets are amongst the most common and amongst the best known of all organisms that live on the seashore. And we've already devoted a couple of episodes of our series to limpets, both to gardening limpets and also to limpets that get up and graze on the seashore and actually keep the rocks clear of algae. But there are several other groups that look a bit like limpets. There are false limpets, and those are actually pulmonates. They're land snails with lungs that have returned to the seashore and actually breathe through a lung rather than with gills. And then there are keyhole limpets, which are limpet-like organisms, have a limpet-like shell, but it has a hole at the top of the shell. And then there are slipper limpets, which are even more adapted. They also have a conical shell, but they're filter feeders. So in keyhole limpets, like the ones at my feet here, then the shell has a different structure to normal limpets. A hole has opened up at the apex of the shell, and through that hole the wastewater from the gills is ejected and also the feces is ejected. So this is a better plumbing system than normal limpets, which have their gills around the edge of the big flat sticky foot and also have their anus there. So they're basically pooping into their own shell. So by having that hole, the animal is able to duct its used deoxygenated water out through a hole at the top of the shell and also push its feces out there. But the price it pays for that is that it loses some protection, because that shell opens it up to predators and also means that there's more evaporation. So you won't normally find keyhole limpets out on the open rock like normal limpets. If you want to find them, you need to turn over boulders or look in little crevices, and they'll be hiding in there in those moister, more protected habitats.
Do they tend to come out at night, or is there a time when it's safer for them?
They're grazers just the same as normal limpets, but they tend to either feed on material that gets pieces of seaweed that get washed under the rocks, or else they come out at night or in rainy weather to feed. Some keyhole limpets are able to completely contract underneath their shells. They're completely protected by the shells. So the only problem is that they've got this extra little hole here, which can give a bit of extra access to predators. In other larger keyhole limpet species, the foot has grown extremely large and can no longer be properly protected by the shell. So the shell really is just like a little hat sitting on the back of the animal. And the animal has to rely on hiding away under the rocks for protection from predators. So mollusk species such as these were almost exclusively described on the basis of just the dead shells in the old days. And only one species was recognized from South Africa. But now that we're starting to photograph the live animals, we've noticed that there are two completely different species. There's this one, which is black and not very frilly, and then there's another one in which the fleshy parts of the animal are red, and they're much more frilly. And that's now been described as another species, actually in a completely different genus. False limpets look extremely like true limpets. They have that same conical shell and usually with the same ridges running down it. But there's a very big difference, and that is that normal limpets have gills, they breathe with gills, but false limpets breathe with a lung.
But then how are they surviving in these rock pools?
Yes, well they actually, although they have a lung, they can use that lung to extract oxygen not only from air when they're exposed at low tide, but also from the water. So they suck in the water into the lung, and there's a big round lung cavity there, which actually has some extra ridges on it to increase the surface area, and they're extracting the oxygen from the water. So they don't burn much energy because they sit very still, so they don't need a lot of oxygen. Despite the fact that they have a lung, they don't have to emerge into the air to breathe. They can breathe the water. But that's the important difference, and if you pick them up and turn them over and look at the right-hand side of the animal, which of course will be on the left if you've turned the animal upside down, then you'll see this little lung opening and the animal taking a breath and then closing again. And that completely distinguishes it from true limpets. This bulge and groove on the right-hand side of the shell, that's where the breathing tube lies and projects out and makes a little bump in the side of the shell.
They seem to be quite adept at surviving in these warm, quite high up on the shore rock pools.
Yes, yes. And they can be extremely abundant there, and the temperature in those rock pools can actually rise well into the 30s. Another important difference between true limpets and these false limpets is that the true limpets produce eggs that they spawn out into the water, and then they have planktonic larvae, whereas these false limpets actually lay their eggs in a mucousy strip, like a strip of glue that's been stuck onto the rocks, and the larvae develop in those little strips and turn into little tiny baby limpets.
Okay.
The last group of limpety named things that we're going to look at are the slipper limpets, and they actually have quite a different biology to the other groups that we've looked at, in that they are filter feeders rather than being grazers. So they don't move around on the rocks, they stay put, and then they pump water through the body cavity, and then they filter that water through the enlarged gills, a little bit like a mussel. So they're getting their food from the water, not from seaweeds.
You say they stay put, but we quite often see them on the backs of whelks.
Yes, an interesting thing about them is that they characteristically occur on the shells of other molluscs. Now, it's not quite clear why they do that, because there doesn't seem to be any solid relationship. It is maybe just a nice place to settle, where if there's sedimentation or something, then the host will get up and move to a nice new spot. But there's no actual feeding relationship between the slipper limpet and its host. And you can see actually that it's like a coiled shell that's largely uncoiled itself. And if we turn them over, you can see this really characteristic feature, which is the shelf that is halfway across the opening of the shell. And that it looks a little bit like a slipper, and that's why it has the name slipper limpet. And the guts of the animal are hidden away underneath that protective shelf there, and then it has a big flat adhesive foot which it uses to grip onto its host. And you almost always see them one piled on top of the other, and that's because they have a really weird and interesting sex life. So that's the most interesting thing about slipper limpets. They start off as males, and then the male will settle on the shell of another mollusk, but then another one will come along in the water, another larva will come along in the water and settle on the top of that one, and as soon as that happens, the lower one turns into a female. And then if another one comes along and settles on the top of that second one, that one turns into a female as well. So you can end up with a stack of 5 or more females all being fertilized by one happy male sitting on the top. And if you turn over the largest ones at the bottom of the pile, very often you'll see a clump of yellow eggs attached to the host. And those eggs actually develop in situ into little crawling larvae. So there isn't a planktonic stage. So they have a very interesting and unusual sex life there.
Why do all the things in the ocean have these weird sex lives? It's a strange place.
Yeah, that's right. Everybody's come up with a separate plan.
This is just one of the many creatures and features that we dive into in our new Explore the Shore book, available in stores now. Hit subscribe for more.